Here he is, comrades. George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows, guaranteed to destroy any weapons of mass deception.
You're listening to George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows, on WBAI, broadcasting from London.
People of America, this is the President of the United States. You are listening to George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. George is a Scotsman, unlike me, an Irishman. Enjoy.
Welcome to the mother of all talk shows with me, George Galloway. I'm in London. The lovely Aoife, and more important, the brilliant Aoife, is in New York, and she's going to be fielding the calls and otherwise holding my hand to get through this show, because there may be some technical difficulties. We haven't really surmounted the ones we had last week, and we're only just on the air by the skin of our teeth, but that won't affect the quality of the show. You can telephone me at a number which someone is going to hand me right now, and you can, of course, feed into the mother of all talk shows, because I want this to be a big conversation. I want this to be a great debate. But in order for it to be a debate, you have to call me. Now, I do want to set out my own views first and foremost on the great issues in front of us today. And they have to be, of course, in the Middle East. It's not that I'm fixated upon the Middle East. Believe me, I'd very much like to be turning my attentions elsewhere in this big wide world of ours. But it so happens that entirely by chance, back in the summer of 1975, well, I entered the doorway marked Middle East, and I've never been able to get out of it since, because so much of such great importance has unfolded there in all the 35 plus years that I've been involved, and nowhere more than in the last few months. And it's only a few months since that young boy in Tunisia set fire to himself, an act of self-immolation which has burned down the dictatorships in many different parts of the Arab Middle East and North Africa. And of course, the fire isn't out yet. Indeed, new fires are emerging all the time. Let's review the situation. In the Yemen, one of the most strategically important parts of the Arab world, in the Persian Gulf, right next door to Saudi Arabia and the other oil-rich kingdoms and principalities, Yemen is going through a thoroughgoing revolution. Now millions are on the streets demanding the resignation and the departure of the president, Ali Abdullah Saleh, who's been the president for 32 long years. No one has ever cast an honest vote for or against him, of course, in all of that time, and he was preparing to replace himself by his son, as they like to do in these Arab republics. However, the masses, emboldened by what had happened in Tunisia and in Egypt, have been pouring onto the streets in their millions ever since. Ambassadors, ministers, senior army officers, leading clerics, personalities of all kinds have all jumped ship from Ali Abdullah Saleh, but he's still hanging on in there. But the masses have decided this really is his last week, and as we speak, there is the biggest demonstration yet going on the streets of Sana'a, the capital of Yemen. 212-209-2900, that's the number to join in. If you want to talk about the Yemen or any other part of the Arab Revolution, call me, 212-209-2900. Now, of course, the war drags on in Libya, and 40 countries gathered in London, the former heart of the empire, just yesterday. They, of course, were a grisly crew, more or less, kings that have never been elected by anyone, lecturing us on the need for the pro-democracy fighters in Libya to be victorious, even though if any pro-democracy campaigner ventured forth on their own streets, they'd shoot them down dead. Indeed, are shooting them down dead in a place called Bahrain, just across the causeway from Saudi Arabia, where democracy upsurge has been crushed mercilessly under the feet, not just of their own dictatorship, the kleptocratic Khalifa dynasty, but the boots and tanks of their neighboring dictatorships, principally Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar, which is, of course, home to the biggest American military base in the entire world, which has done some good things, but which is now going more than a bridge too far. I'm saying on WBAI to my friends in Qatar, pull back from this disastrous course of action on which you have embarked. They and the Saudis have decided to join in the bombing of Libya, or more precisely, the hurling of Tomahawk cruise missiles at $1 million a time at the North African coastline. Doesn't seem to be working. The comic opera army that the airstrikes are designed to buttress are, of course, hurtling backwards and then forwards and then backwards again across the desert highway. They take a town and then quickly they lose it. And then, lo and behold, there was the intelligence being cited by the head of NATO in front of the U.S. Senate yesterday, that he and his intelligence officers had detected, I'm quoting him now, a flicker of Al-Qaeda, a flicker of Al-Qaeda amongst the ranks of the Libyan rebels, whose air force your country and mine has become. And our countries are more or less openly stating that we are about to arm. So let me get this right. We're about to arm people amongst whom there is a, quote, flicker of Al-Qaeda. That's Al-Qaeda who flew the aeroplanes into the Twin Towers in the city I'm addressing right now, killing thousands of people. Why would that surprise? By the way, I don't actually accept that. I don't believe that there's any Al-Qaeda in the ranks of the Libyan opposition. But that's what NATO are saying. Yet we're still going to arm them. But that wouldn't be a surprise, would it? Because we armed the original Al-Qaeda in the first place. Ask me. I was the last man standing, as I told Mrs. Thatcher in the House of Commons, standing against the policy of opening the gates of Afghanistan for the barbarians. The barbarians then were regarded by Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher as freedom fighters, just like the Libyan freedom fighters, amongst whom we have now detected a flicker of Al-Qaeda. Yes, I say to younger listeners who may not be aware, Bin Laden was our man. We armed him. We helped finance him through our Saudi Arabian satrapy. We gave him the weapons, including the anti-aircraft Stinger, handheld anti-aircraft missiles, which are now being used against British and American forces in Afghanistan today. Yes, these people read Frankenstein all right, but they didn't read it to the end. They didn't understand that the point about Frankenstein's monster was that the monster got out of control, because you can't control a monster. That's why it is a monster. You're listening to WBAI, George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows, and my telephone number is 212-209-2900. I need your calls if this is going to be a great debate. And then there is Syria. The president of Syria, Bashar al-Assad, was supported by a rally in Damascus of reportedly 1 million people yesterday, and today, just as you were waking up, he was addressing the Syrian parliament. He promised reforms, and we hope that he will deliver them, because he promised them in 2005 and went into a long and perambulatory explanation this morning as to why those promises hadn't been kept. But they better be kept this time, or Syria will, of course, find itself in exactly the same situation as these other Arab regimes are finding themselves in, which would be a pity from my point of view. Why, you ask? Well, Syria has been targeted, not actually because of any imperfections in its system of government, not actually because it has done some things wrong, though both of those are true. But Syria has been targeted not for any wrong that it's done, but for the right that it's done. And what is that, you ask? It has refused to bend the knee to imperial power. It has maintained a kind of Arab dignity in front of the foreign onslaught on the Arab world this last decade past. It has refused to sign a surrender peace with the Israeli occupation of its country. It has refused to abandon the liberation movement based in Damascus, trying to recover the land of Palestine from those who stole it. And it has refused to abandon the liberation movement of Lebanon next door, which drove the Israeli occupation from its land and continues to defy all imperial plots to disarm it until its country is cleared of foreign occupation. That's my point of view. You may have a radically different one. That's why I want you to call me on 212-209-2900. It's George Galloway. It's WBAI. It's the mother of all talk shows.
I did not have sexual relations with George Galloway. This is George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows.
Well, that was President Clinton telling the truth. He did not. But word has it that he does listen to my radio show. At least I hope so. Now, Hollywood is, of course, a part of U.S. soft power. For someone of my age, I grew up with fantastically positive images of America, thanks to Hollywood. I didn't know, of course, that Hollywood was not the all-white, all-comfortable, all-middle-class place that Hollywood portrayed it to be when I was young. I didn't realize then that the story of the conquering of the West was not quite the story of John Wayne and the cavalry and the white hats, the cowboys, surrounded by whooping, quote-unquote, savages who were only intent on cutting the heads off good old white folks like me. It wasn't until Soldier Blue and other movies like it exploded on the scene, and books like Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, that I realized that the United States that I grew up knowing and loving was not the whole story. One man who knows more about Hollywood and the American way than anyone I've ever met is Matthew Alford, and I hope he's on the line now as my first guest this morning. Matthew, good morning to you.
Yeah, good to speak to you, George.
Matthew, the last time I spoke to you, we talked about Hollywood and capitalism. Let's talk about ways in which Hollywood buttresses, galvanizes, gains support from, generates soft power for the American role in the world today. Talk us through that, will you?
Well, Hollywood films tend to support the idea that American power in the world is benevolent, and also the idea that force is an effective way to make the world a better place, make the world safe for democracy. That tends to be the way that narratives work. Films, whether they're Wind Talkers, Black Hawk Down, You Don't Mess with the Zohan, Air Force One, you'll have seen some of these, I'm sure, Rambo, Collateral Damage. They all suggest that violence from the American state is an effective way to generate peace, democracy, and indeed free markets.
Now tell us about the ending to one of those Rambo films. It was a great story, and you told it me the last time I talked to you.
Do you mean the end of Rambo 3?
I do, yes.
That one is, of course, dedicated to the people of Afghanistan, but during the 1980s, which, of course, became Al-Qaeda. I was listening to your introduction there, and it actually reminded me of a more modern example than Rambo 3, which is from 1988. But the film Charlie Wilson's War, with Tom Hanks and Julia Roberts, which came out in 2007, was also about the struggle of the Mujahideen, and did exactly what you said, which is to kind of turn history on its head and prevent a stronger link being made between the U.S. arming of those rebels or freedom fighters and the events of 9/11. And in fact, there was a CIA officer or former officer on set who was the principal advisor for the film, who said that one of his achievements on set was to prevent that link from being realised within the script. There are also a number of other very serious omissions in the script that had been that occurred over time, including a discussion about the Israel-Palestine situation, which were excised. We don't really know why. But yeah, this kind of thing happens on a fairly regular basis with any film script that threatens to get out of control.
Now, does it just happen by a process of osmosis, Matthew? Is it just that the studios know which way they should face, or is there a more direct involvement by the U.S. government?
I think that's a really central question, and most of this is, of course, self-censorship. I mean, the kind of corporate mindset is not really very well disposed towards kind of radical reinterpretation of history or exposing crimes of the state, or of trying to make sense of the victims that we are creating in the world. So a lot of this is just that Hollywood is characterized by corporate influence, but there are also many organizations, the major organizations, political institutions are also working on set with films on a constant basis. That's the Pentagon, the White House sometimes as well.
So the Pentagon actually has a presence on the studio set?
The Pentagon has a very large presence and has done since the end of World War II. Probably about a third of films that are anything to do with American foreign policy, or anything that any film that you see that shows U.S. tanks, U.S. planes, U.S. warships, the chances are that it's been funded, it's been supported by the Pentagon. You know, the equipment will have been provided by them. And the key thing about that is that the Pentagon requires very rigid script changes. They go through scripts with a fine-tooth comb to what they say is to make scripts accurate, but of course in practice they are censoring them for political reasons. And some films have been green-lighted by the studios, but then because the Pentagon has refused to cooperate on political grounds, such as the Gina Davis film from the early 1990s called Countermeasures, you know, ultimately they won't get made. And the reason for that one was that the Pentagon put a line through it and said, look, this film alludes to the Iran-Contra affair. We don't see any reason to denigrate the White House or remind the public of the Iran-Contra affair.
Well, of course, all of this goes back a long way, Matthew. As I told you, one of my earliest political operations was in the, I think, late 60s. It might have been early 70s, late 60s, I think, when I and some school friends of mine stood up in the middle of Green Beret and disrupted the movie, scattering pro-Vietnamese literature around the cinema to bemused and some enraged viewers of the movie. So it goes back at least that long. How much further back does it go?
Well, I mean, there was cooperation with the military on Wings, in Oscar-winning film in 1927. So I think that was the first major film that was worked on. Although saying that, even for the Griffiths film from 1917, eludes my memory right now. You know, the one representing the Ku Klux Klan. That was also supported by the military as well. So I mean, it's kind of just been standard practice. And
it continues to today. What about today's movies? Identify one or two of those.
Well, the latest one that's just come out is Battle Los Angeles, a couple of months ago. That's had extensive assistance from the DoD, and that, I don't know if you've seen it, but it was #1 in the box office for a few weeks, and a really sanitized film about aliens invading LA, and then the military response to that. And of course, the military response to it that we're encouraged to follow is seeing a platoon of Marines go in and rescue civilians just before the military bombs. Yeah,
well, the cavalry always comes over the hill just at the right time in the movies. Matthew, you're a very considerable expert. What are you doing next?
Next thing is I'm trying to finish off a book called Puppet Masters of Hollywood, which is kind of sequel to Real Power. Real Power was my first book.
Now, Real Power is R-E-E-L, Real Power.
That's right.
And is it available on Amazon?
Yeah, Real Power is available everywhere, really, and the subtitle to it is Hollywood Cinema and American Supremacy.
Well, I've read that one, and it's absolutely outstanding. If you've got a sequel coming, I can't wait to see it myself. Matthew, thanks very much for joining us. That's Matthew Alford, who's a very considerable expert on the link between U.S. military and political power and the soft power of Hollywood. This is the mother of all talk shows.
George Galloway on WBAI.
Well, I must have a caller by now, Ife. Is there anyone on the line?
Yes, you have Lauji from New York on the line right now.
Excellent. Welcome, New York.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you, George. I'm so glad that you have a show now. To listen to
Thanks.
Wow. George, I would like to ask you just on two issues and that are both germane to what's happening now. One is, how come we're not tying in Rabbi Fisherman's address to the UN in 1946 when he presented Arit Israel to the UN? In other words, the map of Israel, stating what they want as Israel. And this nonsense, I'm going to call it nonsense because it's obviously nonsense, where Obama is saying we're going in to protect the people in Libya when he couldn't go in and protect the people of Darfur, when he couldn't go in and protect the people of Palestine, where they're not going in to protect the people of Yemen. Can you address this for me?
Yes, and thank you for the opportunity to do so. When supporters of Israel, as they frequently do, demand the right of recognition of Israel within secure borders, the first question I ask is which borders? The borders of Israel today, which include the entirety of Palestine, if you include Gaza, which they control absolutely, even if they don't usually have boots on the ground there, or the borders of Israel at the outbreak of Israeli aggressive hostilities in the Six-Day War in 1967? Or do you mean the borders that the United Nations actually delineated in their partition resolution? Or do you mean the borders that the Zionist flag, if you can picture it in your mind now, the two stripes with the Star of David blasphemously inserted in between those two stripes represent the Nile and the Euphrates. That's a very long way. That's from Egypt to Iraq, which is the boundary of the Zionist dream of Greater Israel. Which boundary is it that you want Israel to be secure within? The only security there's going to be for the people who call themselves Israelis today is if they can make peace with the people whose land they settled, if they can make peace with the people around the land that they settled. And that requires the abandonment of the idea of an exclusivist, supremacist Jewish state. The only way forward is for all the Jews, Christians, and Muslims entitled to live on that land to live as equal citizens under the law, under a democracy. One man, one woman, one vote, one government. It's good enough for everybody else. Why isn't it good enough for them? And as you say, the idea of killing for human rights it runs out of the same stable as the American general who announced with all gravity during the Vietnam War that this village had to be destroyed in order to save it. Thanks very much for your call. Ife, have I got any others?
Yes, you have Hector from Puerto Rico on the line right now.
Hector, I was wondering if Puerto Rico would come up, and I have to confess to you I have not yet been able to study it, having been preoccupied with other things. But you've got another hit. Go ahead, Hector. Tell me what I should be thinking on Puerto Rico.
Okay, this is in relation to the Middle East. Okay, the Puerto Rican independence movement salutes the people of Palestine in their struggle for freedom, and also the workers of Wisconsin.
Go ahead, sir.
I wanted to express that because Puerto Rico has been forgotten. Every time the U.S. intellectuals mention the so-called Spanish-American War, they only mention Cuba and the Philippines, and that's it. They don't mention the other colonies. And Puerto Rico did not emerge from the sea after 1898. It has been there for millions of years.
Well, that's a very powerful point, Hector, and we are going to return to the Puerto Rican question just as soon as I can get my nose into the several books and pamphlets that have been sent my way. Thanks very much for that call. Listen, if you have a different point of view to mine, your call is especially welcome. 212-209-2900. Let's go to the next call, Ife.
Sam from Brooklyn is on the line right now.
Good morning. Good morning.
Morning, Brooklyn. I always like to hear from Brooklyn.
How do you do, Mr. Galloway?
Very well, thank you.
I just have a comment concerning, in terms of the U.S. policies at nations that attack us and, so-called terrorism. But, till this day, the USS Liberty has never come up to light. You can ask the common person; they never heard of it, as well as the Lavon affair. Since you were speaking about films, do you think it's possible that maybe a film concerning USS Liberty or the Lavon affair could be made?
Well, it would be terrific if it was. This is an American ship that was fired upon with many fatalities and many wounded by the Israeli forces. The very Israeli forces that your country's taxpayer dollar is keeping afloat.
Exactly.
Well, I think if there's anyone out there ready to make such a film, I'm ready to present it. If we've got any angels out there that would like to make a film on the USS Liberty, I'm your man.
I would love to see it.
Thanks very much indeed, Brooklyn.
Thank you,
Let's go to the next caller, please, Ife.
Yes, you have Jose originally from Jamaica, now in New York.
Jose in New York, welcome, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, brother. Go ahead.
What I'd like to ask is this. I am a victim of that great transatlantic slave trade that your mother country has perpetrated on the rest of us.
Yes.
And we seem to be forgotten, those of us in the English-speaking Caribbean. And we are going through some trying times, and I noticed these countries seem to be so dependent on tourism and whatever other exploitation that the World Bank and all these other institutions can heap upon our countries. What do you see the future holds for these little countries that have very little resources and is so dependent on the largest of these imperialist nations?
Well, you're absolutely correct, Jose. The future is not clear from the Caribbean, from the English-speaking Caribbean. The only thing I would say to you is this, that there is a country called Cuba, and you referred to it. Let me tell you just one of the poster campaigns that I've been involved in Cuba.
Yes.
You may recall that 110 million small children in the world go to work instead of school every day. But as the poster campaign in Cuba says, not one of those children is in Cuba. Cuba has shown by the form of government and the political system that it has embraced, and I'm a regular visitor there. I'm the author of the Fidel Castro Handbook. I've met Fidel many times. I think he's one of the greatest men of the 20th century going into the 21st. They have shown that even without significant resources, by self-organization, and by political and national unity, it is possible to move mountains. And I would hope that in the future, that the Caribbean countries can work together on the Cuban model. That would be the suggestion that I would make. But of course, none of these areas and no country can solve its problems in isolation one from the other. There must be more political unity amongst the English-speaking Caribbean countries themselves, so that when they're dealing with the European Union, when they're dealing with what you call the mother country that brought most of the populations there in the first place and for the reasons that you adduce, they are in a stronger position to do so. What do you think?
Well, the thing I find is we have been fighting these rascal autocracies that we have in these English-speaking Caribbean. And somehow it is an uphill battle, and they're not budging, and for some reason they cannot see the evil of their ways. And it is a hard fight, and we're up against a stone wall, and I don't know what it's going to take for the people to come to the realization that these rascals are taking us down the road to destruction.
Well, there have been great leaders, of course. Maurice Bishop was a great Caribbean leader in Grenada. Michael Manley, a great Caribbean leader in Jamaica. There have been great leaders. Maybe we're in a fallow period at the moment. Listen, thanks for your call. 212-209-2900.
My fellow Americans, you can misunderestimate me if you will, but do not misunderestimate Mr. George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. It always has controversial ideas and sometimes very big words like disambiguation. I got it right.
Brilliant. My old mate Lewis MacLeod is the producer of these wonderful stings, and I can't thank him enough for that. Now listen, one of the things I'm working for at the moment is to build the Summer University of Palestine, which will be held at the American University of Beirut, which is the Sorbonne of the Arab world, the most beautiful, the most prestigious of all the universities in the Arab world. It's in the Lebanese capital, Beirut. It's called the AUB, the American University of Beirut. And on that campus, from the 23rd of July for 1 week, we'll be holding the Summer University of Palestine. We'll have the world's best speakers from all over the world, including North America, will come and talk not just about Palestine, but its place in the Arab world currently shaking, trembling before this revolutionary wave. So the title of the Summer University this year is Palestine's Place in the Revolutionary Ferment that is the Arab world today. All are welcome, not just those of normal student age. You can be a student at any age. And if you go to www.vivapalestina.org, you can click on the button that deals with the Summer University of Palestine, and you can work out whether or not you can come. You can stay in the dormitories if you're so minded. They're beautiful, separate dorms, of course, for men and women, and very high class and good standard they are too. But if you prefer hotel accommodation, we can even help point you in the direction of the different classes of hotel accommodation available in that week in Beirut. I'll be one of the speakers, and there will be many, many more. And if you're able to come, I promise you, you won't want to miss it, because by the end of that week, you'll be better educated about the situation in the Arab world and the Palestinian situation within it, and you'll be better empowered to be an activist and to be a commentator even on those events when you get back home. So that's www.vivapalestina.org if you're interested in the Summer University of Palestine.
This is the President of the United States. Yes, I promised you change. Change you could believe in. Well, here it is. George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows.
Well, change you can believe in. Indeed, hasn't been as much of a change as people like me hoped. I had been one of those who earliest in Britain identified the talent that was Barack Obama. I plugged him on my UK radio show over and over and over again when most people in Britain couldn't pronounce his name, and some in the United States on Fox News still can't pronounce it yet. And I invested a great deal of my hopes that President Obama would be very different from the last guy who had at least the alibi of being an imbecile. President Obama has no such alibi. He's a professor, a real intellectual, the cleverest president perhaps that you've ever had. But the difference has not been as great as I had hoped. How about you? 212-209-2900. That's the number to call. Ife, do we have another caller?
Yes, you have Chris from Brooklyn on the line right now.
Excellent, Chris. Welcome to the show, my friend. What would you like to say?
I actually want to talk about a revolutionary topic. It would be revolution if it were understood in this country the way I see it. And I have to thank WBAI for educating me, even though the information was very upsetting the first time I heard it. I said I couldn't believe it, but I've heard so much and read so much, and it involves the truth around 9/11. And, you know, nobody airs this, and the issue particularly I wanted you to address was the report by the professor from the university out in Utah who he had a half hour on Amy Goodman's show in detail, and he gave a report stating that there was 10 tons of thermite in those buildings, and that it was a controlled demolition. And he said, I'm a scientist, I just want to know, how did it get there? What was it doing there? Who put it there? And there's no refuting the fact that it was there, and he lost his job over filing this report. And that's my question for you. And I think
okay. Well, let me answer it generically, because I haven't read the report to which you refer. But you could always send it to me at office@georgegalloway.com, which is the best way to communicate with me directly. I'll answer you generically. There are many unanswered questions about 9/11. The 9/11 official report is seriously inadequate. There are many questions, as I say, that remain unanswered and to which we should campaign for and demand an answer. But I don't believe that the Twin Towers was brought down by a controlled demolition. I believe the Twin Towers were destroyed by the two aeroplanes that I saw with my own eyes flying into them. I believe that the reason those planes flew into those buildings is because they were hijacked. And I believe that they were hijacked by people who answered the call, at least, if not under the direct control, of the aforementioned Osama bin Laden and the Al-Qaeda, Salafist, jihadist, extremist, terrorist network. Sometimes when something looks like a duck and walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it really is a duck. If the point that you are seeking to make is that George W. Bush or the American state brought down the Twin Towers and killed thousands of their own citizens, I have to tell you that I don't believe you. I am entirely unpersuaded of that gigantic story for many reasons, but the most important one of which is this, that such a conspiracy would have to involve so many people that the truth would undoubtedly come out. And if that were the truth, and it did come out, it would not just be the end of the Republican Party. I mean its end. I mean its literal end. It would be the end of the political system in the United States itself. And I just don't believe that any political actor in the United States capable of winning the White House and controlling from time to time the Congress would be willing to take that risk, nor would have any reason to take that risk. If they wanted to provide a casus belli sufficient to take the U.S. into war against its own liberty at home and against Muslim countries abroad, there were far less dangerous ways of doing that. And indeed, the flying of the two planes into the Twin Towers would have been casus belli enough. So that's where I stand on 9/11. I'm well aware that there are many people in the United States, many of them on the left, many of them on the right, for that matter, who are so disenchanted, so mistrustful of anything that the state says that they are ready to believe anything. And I understand that. I just think that they are wrong. Moreover, by disappearing down these blind alleys of chasing conspiracy theories on this, they are letting the real culprits off the hook. You see, those aeroplanes that struck the Twin Towers may have appeared to have emerged from a clear blue sky, but in fact they emerged from the swamp of hatred and bitterness against us, which exists in the Muslim world and which we are steadily and repeatedly refilling. That's my point of view. You can, of course, give me yours, 212-209-2900. Ife, do we have another caller?
Yes, you have Doug from Staten Island.
Doug in Staten Island, welcome.
Welcome, Mr. Galloway. Nice to speak to you, sir.
And to you, sir. Go ahead.
It's just a bit sad, your last caller there, but you're harking back to pre-Reagan when we had 50 outlets for our media, and now we're down to the big 5. And, I speak to so many people around the world who remind me that for the shining city on the hill and intellectually and technologically advanced people, we're the most propagandized, and we don't even realize it.
Yeah,
so unfortunately,
it's 1,000 points of darkness instead of 1,000 points of light.
Yeah, unfortunately. So a lot of lost souls end up going down this way.
Anyway, WBAI is shaping up like a good antidote.
It certainly is. It certainly is. George, I'd like to hearken you back to the time just after the invasion of Iraq, when you were being pilloried and fried and roasted by the BBC and every other major network around the world for your outburst on the floor of Parliament and your discourse into why we should not be there as a country or as a United Nations group, etc. But you had something very eloquent, and you have a pretty good memory, George. I'm wondering if I could hearken you back to when you were talking about the time when we had our soldiers abusing people over in Iraq. Mm-hmm. We have that going on right now. There's a trial going on right now of some unit of 12 soldiers that went around basically killing wantonly
and posing with the corpses.
Yeah, exactly. We don't get very much of that in the media. Rolling Stone came out with that, though, finally, after Der Spiegel did it. And, of course, Democracy Now! Always does it. But you were very eloquent into why this could happen. And as a former soldier myself, George, I've seen in the past what could happen when you stay in a country for a long, long time. I'm in my 60s, so I think you know what I'm speaking about.
Yes.
And how you start to view the citizens that you're supposed to be there to protect, and the way you view them, and how these kinds of horrors can be, not only perpetrated on the citizenry who you're supposedly there to try to save, but can also the horrors can end up coming home to yourself, that you end up becoming...
Well, that's right. I'll tell you what, that's a great call. I'd let it go on, but there's a lot of people trying to get through. It's a very eloquent call, and I think the listeners have got the message, even without the direct quote from me, which may have been coming. But let me paraphrase what that quote, I think, is. It is this, that people behave in this way, not because they're Americans or because they're British, or in another context because they are Israelis, still less because they're Jews. People behave like this because they're occupiers. They behave like this because the only basis on which an empire can persist in occupying other people's countries is by the systematic dehumanization, not just of the natives, of the victims in the occupied land, but ultimately the dehumanization of the occupying soldiers themselves. Because if you pump people full of weapons and propaganda and tell them that they are subjugating these people because somehow you are better than them, then the kind of horrors that we saw at Abu Ghraib or at My Lai, or as you are now seeing from these trials in the United States about the occupation in Afghanistan, that's where these things emerge from. Terrific call. Let me invite some more. Ife, do we have any more?
Actually, you have Pepper from Paterson, New Jersey on the line.
Oh, fabulous. Pepper in Paterson, New Jersey. Now, Paterson is in the Bob Dylan song Hurricane. Did you know that?
No, I did not, sir.
Well, listen to it. You'll hear the word Paterson. Go on.
I live in Paterson, New Jersey, and I live more towards South Paterson, where there's a heavy Islamic population.
Okay.
I became friends with some of the Islamic women here, and they have a large concern about, they're very happy what happened in Egypt, but they have a very large concern about what's going on in Libya, and they feel in this country a lot of people don't like the war, but they don't protest about it. They leave it up to what's going on television. They have a concern that basically it feels like America is very asleep and still behaving very narcissistic in the way of everybody still wants to be like us, everybody wants to be like America, and they'll be better for it. And what they usually ask me, and I have no answer for this, what will it take for America to wake up? Or does it take more than unemployment? Does it take more of a heavy crisis for them to realize maybe...
Well, listen, Pepper, that's another great call. I cut it short only for the aforementioned reasons. A terrific call from Paterson, New Jersey, and drawing on something that's very important to me, which is this conundrum that you and I, as citizens or you as citizens, me as a subject of the two big empires of the last 100 years, the two biggest empires of the last 100 years, this God-given, apparently, right to interfere, intervene, occupy, and change any country in the world that we like. And it does flow from that belief that appears to be most present, it's not entirely, it's not exclusive, but most present in the Anglo-Saxon world. The belief that somebody, God maybe, chose us to interfere and intervene and occupy and make war endlessly against other people and intervene in their countries. And we are seeing it all over again. I am myself campaigning on a daily basis, which is why my voice is rough, against this latest war on Libya. I'm speaking on it in London this evening at Conway Hall in Red Lion Square. You'll get it, I'm sure, on YouTube in the morning tomorrow or perhaps the next day. And there are many important speakers. Mr. Tony Benn, the political father of most of us in the United Kingdom, a very great man, and a very old man now. He's making an important speech there this evening too. And we're doing this not because we support Gaddafi. We don't. Indeed, we're the people who were against Gaddafi over the last decade when Britain and America were queuing up to do business with him. But we say that showering poor North African Arabs with cruise missiles can never lead to anything good. It just can't. The idea that these rebels, amongst whom we're told now by NATO there's a flicker of Al-Qaeda, are the way to democracy in North Africa is ridiculous. The idea that Britain and America, who've never launched a weapon for democracy in their lives and never launched a weapon, in my opinion, since 1945 that was worth supporting, and even then was worth supporting for different reasons from those actually believed in their hearts by Churchill and by Truman. Thanks for that call, Pepper. Let me try and get some more in. Ife, any more callers there?
Yes, you have Mike from Long Island on the line.
Mike in Long Island, welcome to the show. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Galloway, I love your show.
Thanks.
Following up on what the previous caller said about people waking up finally, you were right last week about the demonstrations in London. They were massive this weekend. Do you think that that's an indication that perhaps...
Well, I do. I think those demonstrations were really massive, and there was a big effort made to divert people's attention to some of the activities of some anarchist groups afterwards and so on, some of which were reprehensible, but many of which were not. There's a group called UK Uncut, for example, that peacefully occupied prestigious stores in central London, not because they hate rich people, but because they want rich people to pay their taxes. And they were peacefully occupying stores that were avoiding their taxes. And of course, if they weren't avoiding their taxes, we wouldn't need these cuts in the services that poor people depend on. But the big story in London was that 500,000 workers from the organized labor movement from all parts of the kingdom were there in London demanding an end to this austerity, which is, first of all, not necessary, and secondly, is being applied in entirely the wrong places. How are people in the United States facing up to your austerity programs?
Well, it's somewhat similar to what's happened in Wisconsin, I would think, but what happened in London was so much larger. We also have U.S. Uncut in this country, which is similar to U.K. Uncut, which is trying to call attention to, like Bank of America, that doesn't pay any taxes to the government in this country, but received a huge bailout a couple of years ago when the Wall Street crisis hit. Do you think that these things will be successful in reversing the austerity, which is really counterproductive towards getting the economy going?
Well, Mike, I can't say to you that I believe they'll be successful. All I can say to you is something that was taught to me when I was a very young boy, that if you don't run, they can't chase you. And that if you fight, you can't guarantee to win. But if you don't fight, you can guarantee to lose. That's why I say to the listeners of WBAI, stand up for the rights of working people at home and abroad. Let me try and squeeze another call in, Mike. Ife, anyone else?
Actually, yes. You have Rose from Stamford, Connecticut on the line.
Wow, Rose, I think you're my first caller from Connecticut. You're very welcome. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning, Mr. Galloway. A quick question. You know, I actually coincidentally had a call from a friend of mine yesterday who recently returned from Israel. She was going with a sort of a Christian tour. So
Yeah.
in any event, she called me and told me this. She's, I just got back from Israel. Everything is so wonderful. The Palestinians don't pay taxes there. And okay, so I, don't know a lot about the situation. I know some. I've read Edward Said and some things. I'm minimally knowledgeable. What does that mean that she thought it was very, positive?
Well, what it means is that she was blinded by the light that they shone in her eyes, I'm afraid. And like the Good Samaritan, it is incumbent upon all genuinely Christian people not to walk by on the other side of the road. But of course, you have to see the suffering that's on the other side of the road in order to pause and try to help to bring relief to it. It always amuses me, because otherwise I'd cry, about the number of Christians who go to what they call Israel, who appear absolutely unaware of the plight of Christians in the Holy Land, of the plight of Christian Palestinians who are unable to pray in Jerusalem, who are unable to pray in Bethlehem, at the Church of the Nativity where Jesus was born. They're unable to go into Jerusalem because they have to pass through checkpoints and blockages through which a camel would not be able to pass through the eye of a needle more easily. The suffering of the Palestinians is complete in Palestine. 3 million Palestinians are under illegal military occupation in Palestine for more than 40 years. And I bet the Christian tourists weren't shown that. If they were, they would have been able to hear from the Palestinians under siege in Bethlehem and in East Jerusalem and elsewhere in the West Bank and throughout the Holy Land just exactly how miserable their lives are. Far from not paying taxes, they pay a lot of taxes but receive no services. And of course those taxes are levied illegally because the land is occupied illegally. They have no votes. How's that for taxation without representation? They have no votes because they're illegally occupied people. And then there's the 1.5 million Palestinians who are living as second-class citizens of Israel itself. And ask any of those what it's like to be a so-called Arab in Israel, and you'll begin to see the picture is not as your friend saw it. So tell her to read Edward Said, who was, of course, himself a Christian, and his truth will perhaps open her eyes.
Well,
it's been marvelous, Rose, in Connecticut.
Thank you very much, Mr. Galloway.
I enjoyed talking to you very much indeed.
Your show was
I think
wonderful.
I'm coming to an end now, and I'm not here next week because there's a special set of programs on the air at this time next week. But, God willing, I will be here the week after that. So make a date. Stick with WBAI, which is one of the vanishing points of light in amongst the darkness of corporate media America. I'm George Galloway. This has been the mother of all talk shows, and I've been talking to you from London, courtesy